Frederick Douglass was born on February 14, 1818 in Talbot County, Maryland. Frederick Douglass had two masters, Aaron Anthony and Thomas Auld. Aaron Anthony died 2 years after he acquired Frederick Douglass. Thomas Auld's wife, Sophia Auld, taught Frederick, who was 12 at the time, to read and write by teaching him the alphabet.
Once Thomas Auld prohibited his wife from teaching Douglass, he continued his education by learning from the white children around the neighborhood.
His new passion for reading drove him to read newspapers and any type of literature he can get his hands on. But what he really loved to read was political literature, and the opposition of slavery began to take form. In later years, Douglass credited the Columbian orator for defining his views on human rights. Frederick was later moved to work for Edward Conway, called the Slave Breaker. His abuse on 16-year-old Douglass nearly broke him psychologically. After Conway lost a physical confrontation with Douglass, he never beat Douglass again. Douglass was hired out by William Freeland and started teaching slaves on plantations how to read the New Testament.
Douglass's life sort of stands across the expanse of the 19th century as a symbol of the worst and the best in the American character. He was the slave who saw most of the worst brutalities of slavery. He was the slave, however, who freed himself and by luck, pluck, and gifts remade himself. Most importantly, he had an enormous ability to capture in words the meaning of what America is about.
I have no accurate knowledge of my age, never having seen any authentic record containing it. By far the larger part of the slaves know as little of their ages as horses know of theirs, and it is the wish of most masters within my knowledge to keep their slaves thus ignorant. I do not remember to have ever met a slave who could tell of his birthday. Frederick Douglass, 1845.
It was along the eastern shore of Maryland near a quiet creek called the Tuckahoe that the life of the man who would inspire a nation began.
Frederick Douglass was born in Talbot County on Maryland's eastern shore. He wasn't certain of his birth himself. In fact, he thought that he had been born in 1817.
But slave records tell of the birth of Frederick Augustus to a slave named Harriet in February 1818.
He knew who his mother was, although she was a distant figure in his life. She lived on another plantation. He never really knew who his father was, although he came to believe that his father was definitely a white man and probably his master.
Raised by his grandmother at the far end of the plantation, the tiny boy named Frederick led a carefree, playful life along the muddy shores of the Tuckahoe until he was 6.
At about age 6, Douglass found that his childhood had come to an abrupt end. He was assigned to act as the companion and caretaker of the child of the owner of the plantation. And as a result, he could get in trouble for things that he either had done or had failed to do. And so it became immediately apparent that he was no longer a child, but was a slave and was part of that institution of slavery.
In 1855, Frederick Douglass published his second book named My Bondage, My Freedom.
In the book, My Bondage, My Freedom, Douglass talks about what the difference of being a field slave and a ship slave feels like.
After writing his autobiography, The Narrative Life of Frederick Douglass, he fled to Britain after escaping from his master.
I was raised by my grandmother. We lived far from the slave quarters, and so I didn't know what went on there. And one day when I was 6 years old, my grandmother was told to walk me to the workhouse near the master's place. She sent me over to play with the other children and abandoned me there.
Dear Lord.
She loved me, but she had no choice.
What a horrible crime. An innocent child. Why were you raised by your grandmother? What about your mother?
My mother, I only saw her a few times at night. She was taken away after I was born to work as a field hand 12 miles away. She walked all the way back a handful of times, but even so, they never let me know her enough to really love her. That left a hole I can't express it.
My mother left me too. I was 5. She worked in another town for a few years. I missed her terribly. But that was nothing compared with...
No, it's never nothing.
My dear Mr. Douglas, join me. I urge you. You have a gift. Sir, you really do.
You flatter me.
No. No, I don't.
Mr. Garrison, you must understand how unexpected this is. I never imagined...
You have an opportunity to strike a blow for the slaves who continue to suffer as we speak. Did the Lord give you these gifts so that you could spend your life working in the shipyards?
I see now why you are such an effective advocate.
You do it then.
I think I will.